Hey, Elevate, it's me, Pastor Ed. So glad to be with you today. Hey, we are going to continue in our series called Detox. All year long, we've been in this series. It's a study of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Called Detox, as we'll see in a moment, because the church at Corinth was toxified. I'm going to start with a question. Why don't you think about some of these things for a moment? When a curveball is thrown to you, how do you respond? I've got a quick list of maybe 10 or so different curveballs that I want to read to you. Maybe the first is this. You're enjoying Netflix, and all of a sudden it starts buffering. It's just maybe one of those simple everyday curveballs. You're like, what's going on? Maybe you're enjoying some hard work on an unsaved document, and you start to see that spinny ball of death spinning. It's a curveball. It's scary. What's going to happen next? Maybe you're enjoying your freedom, and all of a sudden you're grounded. It's tragic. You're enjoying the freedom of a cell phone, and it's taken away. This is one I personally hate. This is a curveball I never like to see. You're enjoying a meal, and then you find a hair. The meal is over. It's a terrible curveball. Maybe you're enjoying the rest of a nap, and you're abruptly woken up. Maybe you're enjoying your home. You're enjoying your school, and now you have to move. Maybe you're enjoying the love and the companionship of a pet, and he dies. Maybe you're enjoying a loved one, and they pass away. I know maybe this one strikes some of us. Maybe you're enjoying just your life, and you hear the word cancer. Maybe this applies to all of us. You're enjoying everyday life. You doing what you do, going to your sports, going to school, seeing your friends, and you hear this thing called COVID-19. I mean, it's the reason why we're here right now. It's the curveball. It's the interruption of everyday life. How do you respond when life throws you curveballs? Here in 2 Corinthians 4, this is where we left off. Paul is going to be talking about life's curveballs and how he's responded to the curveballs of life. It's very, very interesting how he talks about in chapters 4, 5, and 6, how his ministry will continue here at this church in Corinth. And the church at Corinth, as we've been looking all year long, is an incredibly toxic environment. Remember, we talked about how Corinth sits in this landmass, this land bridge, and so there's a lot of traffic moving through this isthmus. And the Olympic Games are held there, and people are moving through, and traffic and people and sin in this very smart, very philosophical, very proud, very educated, very informed city grows. This church is planted in the center of it. And this church begins to take on all the toxins of the world. Corinth is a very powerful city, and it influences the world all around, very much like where we're situated today. And what happens is this church is bringing in these toxins, and it's causing the church to be less and less effective. And so Paul writes to the church. He says, hey, listen, there's a problem. He writes in Romans 1, verses 21 through 32, really talking about the unraveling of morality. And he's writing this, maybe even looking out his window while he's in Corinth, watching, every night 1,000 priestesses coming down, these prostitute priestesses, remember as we talked about this, coming down to the streets. He's watching morality unravel, and he's like, it's crazy because I'm watching some of the same things happen right there in you in the church. And so he calls for a detox in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. And today what we're going to look at is toxic despair. When life throws you curveballs, which life will always throw you curveballs, we're living in the midst of a curveball right now when it comes to this whole coronavirus situation. How will you respond? Because it's very, very easy. It would be very easy for Paul in this situation, as he pens 2 Corinthians 4, to be very despaired and to forget about what he's just written about in chapter 3 about the gospel and to let despair reign. What Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 57 and 58, which is just the crux of what we're talking about in this whole detox series. He says, because of the victory in the gospel, Because we have victory over sin and death through Jesus, be steadfast, be immovable, and always be abounding in the work of the Lord. That's our goal. Our goal is to detox from all of the trash that's out there, all the trash that can make its way into here and into here. And on this process, on this progressive process of sanctification, saying, Lord, is there anything in me? Lord, do you need to change something in me? Do you need to examine something in me? Should you expose something in me to help me? Lord, to draw me closer to you. And so here Paul starts to talk about toxic despair and how to fight against it. And you'll see very, very quickly, this has a great application for where we are today, 2020, March. He talks about this new covenant in chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians, and he's continued here in chapter 4, and skipping down to verse 7, as we've been doing, just taking these two letters chapter by chapter, looking at some highlights, trying to detox from the things in this world, as the writer in Hebrew writes, the sin that so easily entangles. It's so easy for it just to kind of just find itself in us. We're detoxing from despair. In chapter 4, verse 7, he says, we have this treasure, speaking of the gospel, in jars of clay. We'll talk about jars of clay at the end, to show the surpassing power that belongs to God, not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. We're struck down, but we're not destroyed. He continues, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. Skipping down to verse 16, 17, and 18, he says, we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Paul is going to talk here about what it looks like to avoid despair in life's changing, chaotic situations. Again, it's what we're living in right now. I studied this passage maybe a month ago in preparation for today, before any of this stuff was happening. The quarantine, the awesome memes about the quarantines that are out there, anything COVID-19 related, all this stuff. I mean, this was before any of this happened, and it's so cool to see God's sovereignty and his provision to allow us to now talk about how do you not despair in the face of curveballs. He first draws out this idea, and we're going to look specifically here in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. I want to draw out this idea and just use it in a word as misery. The word misery is really what Paul is talking about. This idea of being afflicted but not crushed. That word crushed is to be confined into a tight place. This is like a physical misery, like I'm physically miserable. Put me on a plane and I'll be physically miserable. That's just how I am in airplanes. I don't like them. To be crushed, to be pushed into a tight place, maybe to be pushed into, have you seen those like boxes that some of our YouTuber friends do, where like who can survive in the box like that is crushed. That is torturous. It's terrible. I wouldn't last 3 seconds is about all I would last. Being afflicted but not crushed. Paul's speaking of physical misery. And then a few verses later, still in the same idea of misery, struck down but not destroyed. A commentator wrote of this passage, to strike down means to be hit with a weapon or to throw down. I love what he says, because he has no idea what he's saying. He says, or to throw down as in a wrestling match. I love wrestling. And I grew up watching the WWF before it was the WWE. And so to throw down as in a smackdown in wrestling, I mean, to me, this is like, this speaks to me because this idea of being physically beat, maybe with like a steel chair over the head or jumping off the top rope, here comes the elbow, baby. Like, that's what I think of. And this is what Paul's thinking of. To be physically crushed, pressed down into a tight space, to be struck down, as in to throw down in a wrestling match. I love that the commentator wrote that. He has no idea what he wrote. It's so funny. This is what Paul's talking about. The physical misery of life. Paul knows it personally. Later in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 33, Paul sums up his life filled with physical misery. This is what he says. I've been closer to death than anyone. I've had more imprisonments, check. Countless beatings, check. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was stoned. I was shipwrecked 3 times, adrift at sea, frequent journeys, in danger of rivers, in danger of robbers, danger from my own people, danger from the Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness. Like, where can I go? Danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from critics, always toiling, sleepless nights, hungry and thirsty, cold and exposed, filled with pressure for the churches, and filled with anxiety. Paul understood misery. We with this brand new lens are starting to see misery, and some of us have seen it before. Maybe, as I mentioned, some of those curveballs in life, and maybe that terrible C word, cancer, or the death of a loved one. We can see how life wreaks havoc on the body. But Paul says, just in a word, misery is what we're looking at, but there's more. Don't be driven to despair yet. He says misery, but also mystery. He says in verse 8, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. He says we're perplexed, but we're not driven to despair. That word perplexed could be defined as being at your wit's end. It's mystery. Misery, the physical pressure of man, what my body, and it hurts, and there's trouble coming, and it's gonna be uncomfortable. Mystery is more emotional, more mental, of like, what's going on? I'm living in this world just like you, where we're in quarantine, and that means different things for different people. And I have to admit, I don't like this. I like my routines. I like to know where I have to be at a certain time. I like being with our junior hires on Tuesday. I like being with our senior hires on Wednesday. I like seeing your faces. This time of mystery, like, when is it going to end? Am I going to get it? Do I have it now and I don't even know? Is it as serious as everyone's saying it is? Is it worse than everyone is saying it is? As a father, I'm sitting at home with my 4 kids and they're like, hey, daddy, how much longer? When can I go to baseball? And I'm like, but I don't know. Hey, daddy, what am I going to say to my friends? Hey, I don't know. Daddy, what do you know? I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. The mystery right now is so real. And the mystery for Paul, what is God doing? How is he working? How's this all going to fit together, is a real thing. The misery, the physical misery, and the mystery, and then he continues, we're afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. This is a direct reflection of Paul's ministry. And so we see misery, and we see mystery, and now we see ministry. Paul's ministry is under attack, and that's what chapters 4, 5, and 6 are all about. His ministry is under attack. He's persecuted. That word persecuted speaks directly to being stalked by enemies and hunted down. When is the last time that you were stalked by your enemies and hunted down? Probably not recently. Paul was stalked by his enemies and hunted down because of the gospel that he was proclaiming. It's a direct connection to ministry and misery and mystery and ministry. Paul continues as we go on into chapter 16, 17, and 18. How about chapter 17? It's a light and momentary affliction. Paul says, although our outer self is wasting away, he says, this is transient. How's this for an idea? That misery and mystery and ministry are momentary. It's the word Paul uses right there, this light and momentary. See, what we have to do in times of curveballs is not go to despair, but say, hey, man, wait a second. The physical misery of life and the emotional and the mental mystery of life and this temporal, this ministry is past. This is a great reminder for me. Like what we're doing, our ability to read the word and share it with others or teach the word in a situation like this or talk about it like we're going to do in our small groups, this is passing away. And as we saw at the end of 1 Corinthians, ministry isn't this thing that's going to be enjoyed in heaven because everything's going to be realized. Only love will go on. Faith and hope will not be needed because it'll all be seen. Ministry is temporal. What we're doing right now is temporal. When we get to heaven, it'll be like, oh, well, there's God right there. We don't need someone to read the word and talk about it. We're in it. Paul says that our outer self is wasting away and there's this light and momentary affliction and everything that we see is just transient, kind of like the raindrops, as we've seen so many of lately, hitting a window and then rolling down the window and they're gone. That's life. Kind of like we saw in our study of Ecclesiastes. Life is havel. Life is a vapor. Life is a vapor of a vapor. It's like a half-life of a vapor. Life is here and then it's gone. It's just, whew. Life is fleeting. Life is momentary. And along with life, the misery of life and the ministry that we get to do in life and the mystery of life, it's all momentary. I love that Paul talks about our outer self wasting away because as our bodies get older, we're slowly wasting away. You know, I used to be able to slam dunk a basketball. That's a straight up lie. I've never been able to slam dunk a basketball. But my body is wasting away. Your body's wasting away. I know this is a hard sell for a high schooler who, like, you're at the top of your game, but little by little, your body is going to be wasting away. Paul says it's okay because this whole thing is momentary. Life's ups and downs, all these things, they're all momentary. Misery and mystery and ministry, it's momentary. But there's another idea, and he says this in verse 16, don't lose heart. If we're working through a main idea for this passage, it would be just that misery and mystery and ministry are momentary. So don't lose heart. That's this whole thing in a nutshell, that misery and mystery and ministry, they're momentary. So don't lose heart. I love how Paul puts it as we open up our passage here as jars of clay. We are jars of clay. There's such a great reminder in there that we are simply jars of clay. He says, don't lose heart. Our outer self is wasting away. Our inner self is being renewed day by day for this light momentary affliction. All this stuff, all this crazy stuff, the physical pressure, the misery, the mental pressures, the mystery. I'm trying to do something here, man. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to share the good news. Ministry, it's all momentary. We look not to the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient. The raindrop, bloop, and gone. But the things that are unseen are eternal. He's speaking of what we first read in verse 7, that we have these treasures of jars of clay. What are jars of clay? Well, in the ancient Near East and in Paul's time, and even here in our time, we have these things called jars of clay. Paul's speaking specifically in context of cheap, breakable, replaceable items. We would think of something that would usually be used to hide valuables. Their only worth comes from the valuables that they held. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in clay pots. We use things that are not valuable to hold things that are valuable. It's maybe like our wallet. We use a wallet, not very valuable in and of itself, maybe $10 on Amazon, to hold very valuable items like cash or credit cards or debit cards. Something I think of is this. It's my set of AirPods. The AirPods have a lot of value to them. They really do. I mean, the case itself, the left and right, you lose one, you're going to be in trouble. But I've got this case. This case is maybe $6 on Amazon. It's fake leather. It goes on my keychain, and it takes the valuable, places it, and protects it. You see, the jar of clay, the case shows me that the treasure is not the vessel. The treasure is not this jar of clay. It's Paul speaking of us, of our bodies, of our lives. The treasure is not just our bodies. It's not us necessarily, but it's this awesome treasure of the gospel that we have inside of us. Paul is also showing us that God created me just the way that he wanted me to be. He gave you a skill set. He gave you abilities. He's designed you the way that he wants you to be. And I think that is an awesome encouragement. And it also shows us that simply being available, clean, and empty is all you bring to the table. To hold the value of the gospel, the new covenant that we've just studied in chapter 3, that we're continuing to value in chapter 4, that Paul is losing his life slowly over in chapters 5 and 6. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2, and I love this because it's all he brings to the table as he talks about his ministry. He says, I came and I spoke to you in weakness and fear and trembling, and my speech and message were not plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith might rest in the wisdom and power of God and not in me. I'm just a vessel. I'm just a jar of clay. There's nothing really all that special about me. The real value in what we have as Christ followers is what's inside. It's the gospel. And because of the great gospel, we can say, hey, you know what? Like misery, physical misery, whatever life may throw at me, I'm not going to be driven to despair. It's momentary. Mystery, all of the what's going to happen next, how long is this going to last, what comes after this, it's momentary. And ministry, love it, hate it, it's momentary. Misery and mystery and ministry are momentary. So take heart, Paul charges. That's how you beat despair. Man, I wonder if one day we'll be in heaven and we're kind of reminiscing on life. And sometimes I wonder, like, will I miss ministry? I'll be like, man, remember how much fun we had? Remember Elevate? You guys remember what we would do? Remember how much fun that was? Like, remember how we would toil? Remember how I would just toil over what are we going to do next? What's the plan? What's the calendar? What's the message? What's the stuff? Maybe one day, I just like, I might just miss that. I think there's something so special about a passage like this because it was preordained for a time like this. I would have no idea that the next passage in our study that we've been going through the whole year would speak directly to where we are today. And so what do you do now? Wherever you are, wash your hands. James 4:8 is very clear. You sinners, please wash your hands. But there's also this resting in like, Lord, you're in control and you've got this. There is a flexibility that we need to have. There is an availability that we need to have, just like the vessel. Lord, I just want to be open and available and clean. I think we have such an awesome opportunity in front of us right here and right now. And to be honest, I see it in my own family. I see it in my own life where if we're not careful, we can get filled up with a lot of things to do. And God has slowly taken away little by little by little. Yes, some of us still have school online, but like what else do we have? Sports have been taken away. For some of us, money has been taken away. Idols have been taken away. Even good things like friends and church have been changed or taken away. God has taken away a lot of security for a lot of us. And I would wonder Is it for such a time as this where God's saying, hey, listen, like I want to get your attention. Maybe I've been knocking on the door of your heart for a while. And it's been hard to get to you because you've been hang on. I'll be right there. Okay, God, I know. I need to meet with you. I wanted to read the word. I wanted to pray, but just, hey, hang on. And if we're not careful in a time like this, we can fill our time with, I don't know, just like streaming more content or watching more TV or taking more naps. And I feel like how many of us just need to be still and rest and enjoy Jesus, a phrase that we say a lot around here. Are you enjoying Jesus? Are we able to say from a passage like this, like, Lord, it's true. It's true that misery and mystery and ministry are momentary, and like my eyes are on heaven. I'm just passing through. I'm so transient. I'm just bloop here and gone, just a vapor. It's Havel, and I'm gone. Lord, help me to enjoy you. Lord, help me to live for you. Lord, help me to enjoy this whole quarantine situation. Hey, I'm here for you guys, whatever that looks like. And I feel like most of you know that. But I want to reiterate that I am here for you. If you need anything at all, please don't feel bad about reaching out. From here, as we finish up this time, every week we're going to go to our small groups. And if you don't have a small group, I want you to please, as soon as possible, reach out to us, maybe DM us on Instagram or go to Students at Life at Crossroads, email us, talk to somebody, figure out what small group you're a part of. All of our small groups are going to be going virtual, and we're all on Zoom, and we're all going to be meeting either Wednesday night immediately following this message or Thursday. So please find a small group to talk about some of these things. Hey, I love you so much, and I can't wait to be back with you next week. See you guys next time.